Let's begin by meeting Mr. Vignarajah's supporters. We have former Chief Judge of Baltimore City, Wanda Hurd, longtime civil rights leader Marvin Doc Cheatham, former 5th District Council member Ricky Spector, former federal prosecutor Charlie Sheeler, and former Baltimore City Police officer and FOP leader Robert Cherry. Well, our final guest is a 26-year veteran of the Baltimore Police Department. We want you to welcome right now Bob Cherry. Bob, how are you?
Hey, Kai, good evening. How are you and your family? Good.
We also want to point out that you were the former president of the FOP here in the city of Baltimore as well. As you and I worked together during that time.
We did when you were at WJZ. And just to start off, Kai, just want to make sure. I know I'm just giving a shout out to Jay-Z with Fox 45. I am speaking tonight as a citizen of Baltimore City. I've been a city resident for 30 years, and I vote right here in Northern District. I'm actually on the lot of Polytech High School, where I think Theroux graduated from back in high school himself. But I just want to make sure that you're clear that I'm not speaking either on behalf of the FOP or the Baltimore Police Department, but I am still with the BPD and currently back at the homicide unit.
No, we appreciate that clarification, and that's good for the viewers, those who are watching us tonight on the web to know. Bob, thank you very much. Why do you think Theroux Vignarajah is the person for this job?
So I think, Kai, like looking back, I went through a lot in terms of figuring out who I was going to support for this. I love Baltimore. I've been voting here since I left Boston in 1990. And I think, this is at a pivotal moment in the city where we need a candidate for mayor who is, I know earlier Councilwoman Spector was asked about being an outsider. I actually look at Theroux as the outsider that we need to turn this town around. We're approaching 6 years now with 300 plus homicides again. Matter of fact, while myself and your cameraman Jacob here are doing this interview, our homicide detectives are not far from here in Northwest District working another homicide tonight. We can't do 6 years of that, Kai. We can't wait for the census to come out every 10 years and lose another 8,000 to 10,000 people from our town. And I think, like Mr. Schelling was saying right before me, is what Theroux brings here is a level of being an outsider. Outsider meaning he hasn't been involved in City Hall or the State's Attorney's Office in terms of the top executive, but he brings with him not only someone who went to school here at Poly, the son of 2 Baltimore City public school teachers, but he brings with him a pedigree from Yale and Harvard Law, and he brings with him the ability to work with the components that we need to grow Baltimore. I don't take lightly as a city police officer the fact that Theroux Vignarajah is a former U.S. attorney, is a former division chief at the State's Attorney's Office here in Baltimore City, and then was a former Deputy Attorney General. And in all 3 instances, Theroux Vignarajah made it an effort or made it part of his career to fight violence. Whether it was taking down the BGF over on Greenmount Ave back in 2015, 2016, when he was with major crimes with the State's Attorney's Office, or taking down the folks that were responsible for killing a number of businessmen down in the Greektown. I think that experience is huge, coupled with being an outsider. And I think the most important thing, and I heard Judge Hurd, and I agree with her, and I agree with all the other guests you had on tonight, we, the police, can't do it alone. But I will say this, until we get a handle on the violent crime, like Mr. Schelling said right before me, we're not going to be able to make those investments in our neighborhoods, in the neighborhoods where Doc Cheatham lives in West Baltimore, so that we can create the jobs to give these kids something to do, so that we can make sure that the money is spent on those schools. We're not going to do that, Kai, if we lose another 10,000 people, another 10 years from now. We're definitely not going to do that as we, go ahead.
Your colleague, Sergeant Bill Shiflett, at our town hall in Little Italy called out Mr. Vignarajah for asking those officers, your fellow officers, to turn off that body-worn camera. People were livid about this. What's your response to this, and what's the status of the investigation of those officers?
So Sergeant Shiflett and I have known each other our entire career. Billy, to me, is a hero. What Billy did, Billy's one of those cops that goes out there every day and does his duty. And Billy had a right that night, I think, to question Theroux Vignarajah. I think the difference here, Kai, is we all make mistakes. We're all human. But what Theroux Vignarajah did that night when he was confronted by Sergeant Shiflett, and after that, is he's owned what happened that night. Judge Hurd spoke a little bit earlier in terms of that he didn't turn the camera off until after the police had finished their stop. I think the biggest thing that we need to look at, Kai, is that Theroux Vignarajah was not doing anything wrong that night. His heart is in the right place, which is in this city. And I think there are other candidates who thought they could use this to put a wedge between someone who's actually worked with those of us in law enforcement, someone who actually has the capability to bring different groups together and grow this town. The biggest thing that I liked about it, and Through and I had this conversation because it bothered me as well at first, is he owned it. You know, he realizes now that moving forward, you know, that's not the decision that a citizen needs to make. That's a decision that the police and us as supervisors have to make, because we have to hold our officers accountable.
Bob?
In terms of the investigation, I don't know where that is, Kai. I mean, I'm answering your last question.
No, that's fine.
I don't know where the investigation is. I don't know where the investigation is right now with the body worn camera. I don't work for internal affairs. I never did. I like doing my work right now as a homicide detective, and that's where I'm focused. And I'm convinced that the person that knows best how to bring the different, you know, partners together is Through Vignarajah.
Let's talk about the consent decree quickly. The consent decree is costing Baltimore millions of dollars. Our investigative reporter, Joy LaPola, has been doing a number of stories about this, particularly about this monitoring group and how it's set up. I've talked to officers myself, not going to say who, but I have, and I know you as well, you're a cop, who are saying they believe, this is their opinion, they believe the consent decree, because of officers' ambiguity, about what to do on the street, is what's one of the things that's hurting crime and driving crime up. Do you agree or not agree that the consent decree is causing problems in terms of crime increasing in the city of Baltimore?
So Kai, your question, it's complex and it's multi-layered. You know, there's no way that I can just answer and just say that the consent decree alone is raising or is a cause for crime going up. What I will say is this, is that the consent decree is here. Judge Bradar has been, you know, appointed to oversee it, and we need a chief executive who actually can dive into the details, who can do the audit of the police department, who can bring in a team at the command level that will put us officers in charge and on the street where we're needed, you know, deploying officers where the violence is. We need to work with the community to create those witnesses to commit a homicide and help me close my cases. We need a chief executive who's going to finance the money to go up on more wiretap investigations so that we can bring down some of these violent drug trafficking organizations that are holding our neighborhoods hostage. And yes, we do need to give our officers direction, and I think that direction will come from a mayor who runs a city stat, who runs a CompStat, that will hold his police commissioner accountable. That is not happening right now with the current mayor and what's happening in City Hall.
Bob, I've known you for a long time. Why take a public stand for a candidate now?
Well, I've always taken a stance. Actually, the last person that I supported for mayor, I hope this doesn't hurt Through, but was Martin O'Malley when he first ran in 1999. And actually back then, the FOP backed Councilman Bell. I'm hoping that changes this time. But as a city resident, as someone who loves this city, I'm going to continue to take a stand, Kai. I didn't just take a stand in this election. You know, like I said earlier when you were talking to me, this was a tough decision. There are some good candidates out there. I've known Mayor Dixon and Councilman Scott for a long time, and I respect both of them. But I think, you know, given where we are at a pivotal moment in Baltimore, in this town with, you know, just the joblessness rate, the people we're losing in this town, and this violent crime, I think we need someone who's hands-on. And I think we need someone who has the ability to bring in a strong team, and that person is Through Vignarajah.
Former city cop T.J. Smith is running. What kind of mayor would he make in your estimation?
You know, I tweeted yesterday. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to talk to TJ. I'm disappointed in that, but, you know, that's up to him and his campaign team. And this is before I made a decision to back Through. But I'll say this, you know, Through is a good man, and his heart is also in the right place. I just don't think that Through is ready to be a chief executive. Through, you know, with his time in the U.S. Attorney's Office, with his time in the State's Attorney's Office, and his time as Deputy AG, he's worked hand in hand, not just with the Baltimore City Police, but he's worked with the DEA, he's worked with the ATF, he's worked with jurors, and jurors are going to be important as we bring more cases to trial to get the criminals off the background and stay focused on growing our neighborhoods. Look, TJ spent a lot of time in Anne Arundel and Baltimore City speaking behind a mic like this. That's all well and good, but we need a chief executive who doesn't read from a script. We need a chief executive who's going to be hitting the streets on January 1st, and that person to me is Through Vignarajah.
All right. Bob, stand by. Thank you. Stand by. Our researcher Julian has some questions for you, too. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Cherry, We talk a lot on these town halls about plans to fight Baltimore's crime problem, but people such as yourself are the people that are really on the front lines of these situations, not the people that are always talking about potential plans. So how do you think past mayors have come up short in supporting Baltimore's police department, and why do you think Mr. Vignoraja will do differently?
So thank you, Julian. So I think the biggest thing that Through brings to the crime fighting plan is just what we talked about early on when Judge Hurd said that a lot of us have to come together. You can't depend on the police alone, but we do need the police to at least initiate, those arrests of the violent criminals. We need them in our neighborhoods, out of their cars, walking the streets. And what we have right now is a depleted police department. I think the mayors in the past fell short because they were unable to keep the police who were already here, and not go to Baltimore County, not go to the FBI or DEA, but remain a city cop. And I think part of Through's crime plan isn't just how we deploy police officers, it isn't just how we work with our federal and our local and state partners, it's how we articulate a message to the officers of the Baltimore Police Department that this is where we want you and that we are going to support you. We take a lot of shots at the BPD, but I've been a cop now, as Kai said, going into my 27th year. I love this city. I've never called in sick as a cop, and I'm proud of working side by side with people like Billy Shiflett and other cops across the BPD. And unfortunately, we don't really get that backing from the last few mayors. I'm hoping and I'm confident that Through will recognize that the crime plan doesn't just mean how to fight crime, it means how to keep the crime fighters here in the BPD and working for not just their bosses on the street, but more importantly the citizens that we're here to serve.
Mr. Vignoraja also wants to start a cold case initiative, and that would be based out of City Hall, and it would openly, or rather actively open and reopen murder investigations that involved high caliber weaponry and headshots. So explain to us, not only as a supporter, but also as an experienced police officer in the city of Baltimore, the difference this new initiative could make.
So, the initiative that Through was referring to, a lot of that stuff, we've begun to do, working with our partnership with the ATF, and this is where, again, Through's experience as a former U.S. attorney will be huge. We're already, connecting, multiple cases, via forensic ballistic testing that occurs here at the BPD and with our federal partners at the ATF. And we have teams of homicide and other detectives that will come together, share that intel, and get out on the streets and identify those targets. And we'll come up with a plan on how to bring them in. I think his initiative with the cold case is important because, unfortunately, in a city that does have 300 plus murders a year, we're not able to work every case the way we'd like to work. And I think what Through is saying to those families is that no case is going to go untouched. We may not have the resources right now to dive into it. Again, like right now, we're working this case up in Northwest. That pulls our officers away from a homicide that they might have been working this past weekend. But as long as we continue to work with our partnerships, we have a chief executive who understands really how to fight crime real time and create initiatives where we will keep these cases linked. And when a new lead develops, whether it's a proffer session with a co-defendant who wants to talk to us or a witness we found who, for whatever reason, wants to come forward. I had a case a couple years ago where the wife of a suspect who had since been killed himself, it was eating away at her. And it happened a number of years ago, but she made that call. We convinced her to come forward, and we were not only able to close that case, but we were able to open up a few other leads and some prior homicide cases. That's the kind of good work that the BPD is doing, and that's the kind of good work that I know that Through Vignoraja as mayor will give us the ability to do to keep our city safe and get our investment back where it belongs, which is creating jobs and keeping our kids safe in school.
Mr. Cherry, thank you very much. Kai, back to you.
Julian, thank you. And Bob, before you go, talk to me quickly tonight. I live in Cherry Hill, Westport. I live in Bel Air, Edison. I live in West Baltimore and Sandtown. I live in Southeast Baltimore. Talk to me before anybody gets in office. What can me and my neighbors do in our neighborhood to live a better life and to feel a little bit safer, regardless of who's elected mayor and regardless of who's there right now?
Well, the most important thing, and I'm glad you said that, Kai, whether you live in Cherry Hill or you live up not far from here in Roland Park, I think the most important thing you do first is you take care of your family. You make sure your kids, are going to school and do what you need to do when they come home so that they have, that role model, that parenting that's so needed in this town. when it comes to fighting crime, what we need from the citizens of this great city is not to be afraid to contact us. There's a lot of rumors out there. There's a lot of talk about us not being able to protect people. But one of the things that we know is we can't solve this by ourselves. Video, the airplane, cameras, that all is well and good, and it's a part of the puzzle. To me, as an investigator, the biggest piece and the biggest way we're going to solve these cases is by getting more people, in your neighborhood, in Cherry Hill and Westport, over in Sandtown, Winchester, to unite with those officers that work there. And even if it's a day or two later, pick up that phone and call the Metro Crime Stopper where you can stay anonymous, or call down the homicide unit or the shooting unit, or if you know a bunch of kids that are doing some robberies, call up to the robbery unit and say, hey, look, I want to put this, your way. You should be looking out for a white Chevy Cruze. They're out there doing robberies in Sandtown. Or that murder in Cherry Hill that happened a week ago, you might want to look at those boys that are hanging up on St. Veronica Ave. We need, the citizens' help. We can't do it alone, like Judge Hurd said. And I think, no matter who is elected, if Through doesn't pull this off, I know I'm going to be committed to whoever is elected as mayor to begin to turn this around. We don't need 6 years of 300+ murders in this town.
All right, Bob Cherry. Bob, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Kai.
Thank you very much. And we want to thank all of our guests tonight. We want to thank former Judge Wanda Hurd, Charlie Sheeler, of course, Bob Cherry just now. We want to thank Marvin Doc Cheatham, former president of the NAACP, Ricky Spector as well, everyone who participated tonight for being here and talking about this and for making the case as to why they believe their candidate should be the next mayor.